I raised her from 5, funded every cent of her dream wedding. 3 days before walking down the aisle, my wife dropped the bomb. She wanted her real dad to give her away. So I vanished into the Montana wilderness. When their perfect plan crashed and burned, my phone stayed silent. My name is Lance Bowman. I'm 52 years old, and for the past 19 years, I've been running Bowman Timber, a logging operation I built from nothing but a beat-up Chevy and a chainsaw. Hard work, honest money, the kind of business where your word is your bond and a handshake still means something. I raised that girl from when she was 5 years old, funded her wedding, every single cent of it. Days before the ceremony, my wife Cassandra dropped a bombshell that would have felled the biggest Douglas fir in Oregon. She wanted her real dad to walk her down the aisle. Just like that, 19 years of fatherhood got chopped down faster than a dead tree in a windstorm. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my days cutting down trees that had stood for decades, and here my own family was doing the same thing to me. When it all crashed down around them, when their perfect plan went to hell, those phone calls went unanswered. Sometimes a man's got to know when to walk away from a job site that's too dangerous to work. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, back when I thought I was building something that would last. Back when I believed that sweat equity and love were enough to secure a man's place in his own family. It was a Tuesday evening in late June when Cassandra first brought up Brooke's wedding plans. I was in the garage, sharpening my chainsaw blades, routine maintenance that kept my equipment running smooth and safe. The familiar rasp of steel on stone was almost meditative after a long day in the timber. Cassandra walked in wearing that cream-colored sweater she saved for special occasions, the one that meant she had something important to discuss. "Lance, honey, we need to talk about the wedding," she said, her voice carrying that careful tone wives use when they're about to rearrange your world. I looked up from my work, noting how she avoided direct eye contact. In 19 years of marriage, I'd learned to read the signs. "What about it? Everything's set, isn't it? Venue's booked, dresses fitted, and the down payment on their honeymoon cruise cleared last week. It's about the ceremony itself," Cassandra continued, fidgeting with her wedding ring. "Brooke's been thinking, and she's decided she wants her biological father to walk her down the aisle." The file slipped from my hand, clattering against the concrete floor. The sound echoed in the sudden silence between us. The silence that followed Cassandra's words stretched longer than a fallen oak across a logging road. I picked up the file from the concrete floor, my hand steadier than I felt inside. 19 years of being there for every scraped knee, every school play, every late-night fever, and now I was supposed to step aside for a ghost. "Dexter Hartwell," I said, testing the name in my mouth like it tasted bitter. The same Dexter who disappeared when Brooke was 5 and hasn't sent so much as a birthday card since. Cassandra shifted her weight, a tell I recognized from our early dating days when she was nervous. "He's been reaching out to her lately. They've been talking, and it's been healing for Brooke to reconnect with that part of her history." I set the file down on my workbench with deliberate care, buying myself time to process what I was hearing. The garage suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. "Reaching out how long, Cassandra?" "Because this is the first I'm hearing about any contact." "A few months," she admitted, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Brooke didn't want to upset you. She knows how you feel about Dexter." That hit me like a widowmaker falling from above. A few months of secret conversations, of rebuilding a relationship with a man who'd abandoned his responsibilities when times got tough. I thought about all the times Brooke had seemed distant lately, how she'd been spending more time on her phone, how conversations would stop when I entered a room. "So let me understand this correctly," I said, keeping my voice level the way I would when dealing with a dangerous tree that could fall either direction. "For months, my daughter has been talking to the man who walked out on her, and you've been helping her hide it from me." "Lance, it's not like that," Cassandra protested, but her words lacked conviction. "Then what's it like?" I asked, turning to face her fully. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you both decided I don't deserve to know what's happening in my own family." The overhead light cast harsh shadows across Cassandra's face as she struggled for words. "She's just exploring her roots, trying to understand where she comes from. You can't fault her for that." "I'm not faulting her for anything," I replied, feeling something cold settle in my chest. "But I am questioning why the man who's been her father for 19 years gets blindsided 3 weeks before her wedding with the news that he's been replaced." Cassandra's jaw tightened. You haven't been replaced, Lance. You'll always be important to her. Important, I repeated, the word hanging in the air like sawdust after a long cut. Just not important enough to walk her down the aisle on the most significant day of her life. The next morning came early, like they always do when you've got logging contracts to fulfill. I was up before dawn, loading equipment into my truck, while Cassandra still slept. The physical work helped clear my head, gave me time to think through what had happened the night before. Brooke came downstairs around 7, dressed for her shift at the medical clinic where she worked as a nurse. She moved around the kitchen with that careful, quiet people use when they know they've stepped in something deep. "Morning, Dad," she said, the word hanging in the air between us like morning mist. "Morning, kiddo," I replied, pouring myself another cup of coffee. "We need to talk." She froze with her hand on the refrigerator door. "Mom told you about your secret relationship with Dexter?" "Yeah, she mentioned it." I kept my voice steady, the way I would when explaining safety procedures to a new crew member. "What she didn't explain was why you felt the need to hide it from me." Brooke turned around, her face flushed with guilt and defiance in equal measure. "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this. You never even give him a chance." "Give him a chance?" I set my coffee mug down harder than intended. "Brooke, I gave him 19 years of chances. Every birthday he missed, every Christmas morning you woke up without a card from him, every father-daughter dance where I stepped in. Those were all chances. He was young when he left," she said, echoing her mother's words. "He's different now. He's built a successful business. He's gotten his life together." Something cold and hard settled in my chest. "And what kind of business would that be?" "Real estate development," Brooke said quickly. "He owns several properties in Nevada." I nodded slowly, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "Nevada. That's convenient, considering he owed 3 years of back child support when he disappeared. Different state, fresh start, no messy legal obligations." "That's not fair," Brooke protested, but her voice wavered. "Fair?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about fair? Fair would be the man who raised you getting some advance warning before being replaced. Fair would be honesty instead of months of sneaking around behind my back." The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the old clock on the wall. The same clock that had marked 19 years of mornings, just like this one. 19 years of being the first person she saw when she came downstairs. The one who made sure she had lunch money and a safe ride to school. "I'm not replacing you," Brooke said finally, her voice small. "Then what are you doing?" I asked, genuinely curious to hear her explanation. She struggled for words, her hands fidgeting with her car keys. I wanted to be part of this moment. It feels right. It feels right," I repeated, testing those words like I would test the weight of a tree before making the final cut. After 19 years of me being part of every moment, this one belongs to him. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of heading out to the timber stands like I planned, I drove to my lawyer's office in town. Marcus Donovan had been handling legal work for Bowman Timber since I started the business, and he was one of the few people who knew the full story of my marriage to Cassandra. "Lance," Marcus said, looking up from his paperwork as I walked into his office. "What brings you by? Everything all right with the business?" "I need to update my will," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Specifically, I need to remove Brooke as a beneficiary." Marcus set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "That's a significant change. What's happened?" I explained the situation, the secret communications with Dexter, the wedding decision, the months of deception. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. "You're sure about this?" he asked when I finished. "Once these documents are signed, Brooke won't inherit any part of the timber business or your personal estate." "I'm sure," I said. "A daughter who chooses her biological father over the man who raised her has made her priorities clear. I'm just adjusting my estate planning to reflect reality." Marcus nodded and pulled out a fresh legal document. "We'll need to redo the entire will." "What about Cassandra?" "She gets the house and her personal belongings," I said. "Everything else, the business, the land, the equipment, goes to my brother David." For the next hour, we went through every detail of my assets. The timber rights I'd bought piece by piece over the years. The sawmill equipment that represented decades of investment. The trucks and chainsaws and all the tools of a trade I'd built from nothing. "There's something else," I said as Marcus finalized the paperwork. I want to set up a scholarship fund for kids who've been abandoned by their biological parents and raised by step-parents. Kids who understand that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. Marcus smiled for the first time since I'd walked into his office. That's a good thing you're doing, Lance. What do you want to call it? The True Father Foundation, I said without hesitation. Because sometimes the man who steps up deserves more recognition than the one who steps out. By the time I left the lawyer's office, the legal wheels were in motion. Brooke would discover soon enough that choices have consequences, and that the man she dismissed so easily had been worth more than she realized. 3 days before the wedding, I was loading equipment for what I thought would be a routine job when my phone rang. The caller ID showed David, my younger brother who worked as a private investigator in Reno. We didn't talk often, but when David called, it usually meant he'd uncovered something important. Lance, you sitting down? David's voice carried that serious tone I remembered from when we were kids, and he'd found out something that would get us both in trouble. I'm loading chainsaws into my truck, I said, securing a strap around my equipment. What's going on? It's about this Dexter Hartwell character, David said. I did some digging after you mentioned him last week. Brother, you need to hear this. I stopped what I was doing and leaned against the tailgate of my truck. I'm listening. Dexter Hartwell isn't just some successful real estate developer, David began. He's been running a long-term con game. Multiple identities, fake business licenses, the works. He targets women with assets, usually divorced mothers with successful businesses or inheritances. My blood ran cold. What kind of con? The classic romance scam with a twist, David explained. He reconnects with old flames or children he abandoned, plays the reformed man angle, then works his way back into their lives. Once he's established trust, he starts asking for loans or investment opportunities. Small amounts at first, then bigger ones. I thought about Cassandra's recent behavior, her secretive phone calls, the way she'd been defensive about family finances when I'd asked about wedding expenses. David, how long does this usually take? 3 to 6 months, he said. Just long enough to establish credibility, but not long enough for people to verify his stories. Lance, I found records of at least 4 other women he's done this to over the past decade. My hands clenched into fists. What happened to them? Cleaned out, David said bluntly. Business accounts emptied, personal savings gone, even retirement funds in some cases. He's good at what he does, knows exactly how to manipulate people's emotions. I thought about Brooke, about her sudden need to reconnect with her biological father, about Cassandra's insistence that this was all about healing and family connections. David, I need everything you can find on this guy. Documents, photos, bank records, everything. Already working on it, David said. I'll have a complete file to you by tomorrow morning. Lance, there's something else. The timing of his contact with Brooke wasn't random. He's been watching your family for months, maybe longer. He knows about the timber business, knows about your assets. After I hung up, I stood in my driveway, staring at my house, the house I'd bought and renovated, the garage where I maintained equipment that fed my family, the life I'd built through honest work and dedication. And now a predator was circling, using my own daughter as bait. That evening, I didn't tell Cassandra about David's call. Instead, I watched her carefully, noting how she checked her phone constantly, how she made excuses to take calls in private. The woman I trusted with my life was either being manipulated or was actively participating in my destruction. Either way, I needed to be ready. The morning of Brooke's wedding, I was supposed to be getting into my tuxedo and preparing for the ceremony. Instead, I was loading my pickup truck with camping gear and enough supplies for 2 weeks in the Montana wilderness. David's evidence file sat on my passenger seat. 40 pages of documentation proving that Dexter Hartwell was a career criminal who specialized in destroying families. I'd made my decision during the long, sleepless night after receiving David's information. I could stay and fight, could expose Dexter's true nature, and try to save my family from themselves. But some battles aren't worth winning, especially when the people you're trying to protect have already chosen sides. So I was leaving, not running away, but making a strategic withdrawal from a situation that had become untenable. I had logging contracts in the remote forests of northwest Montana, jobs that would keep me busy and far from civilization for weeks at a time. Perfect for a man who needed distance from the wreckage of his family life. Before leaving, I dropped copies of David's evidence file with my lawyer, my banker, and my insurance agent. Whatever Dexter and his accomplices had planned, they'd find that Lance Bowman wasn't as easy a target as they'd assumed. My accounts were protected, my assets were secured, and my business interests were legally bulletproof. The drive to Montana gave me plenty of time to think. I'd raised that girl from when she was 5 years old, funded her wedding, every single cent of it. Days before the ceremony, my wife told me she wanted her real dad to walk her down the aisle. So I left for the deep woods of Montana, where a man could work with his hands and think with a clear head. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my life cutting down trees that had stood for decades, and my family had done the same thing to me. But unlike those trees, I could choose where to fall. My phone started ringing around noon, about the time the wedding ceremony would have started. First Cassandra, then Brooke, then numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail. When it all crashed down around them, when their perfect plan revealed itself as the elaborate scam it really was, those calls would go unanswered. By evening, I was deep in the Kootenai National Forest, setting up camp beside a mountain stream that ran clear and cold from the snowpack above. The silence was profound. No traffic, no neighbors, no family drama. Just the sound of water over rocks and wind through pine trees. I built a fire as darkness fell, watching sparks rise into a sky brilliant with stars. Tomorrow I'd start cutting timber, honest work that produced something useful and left clear evidence of accomplishment. Tonight, I was exactly where I needed to be, far from people who'd confused manipulation for love and loyalty for weakness. I was 3 days deep in the Montana wilderness when my satellite phone picked up a weak signal and started buzzing with accumulated messages. I was sitting by my campfire after a long day of marking timber for harvest, enjoying the kind of peace that only comes from hard physical work and distance from civilization. The first voicemail was from Cassandra, recorded about an hour after the ceremony should have started. Her voice was tight with panic and barely controlled hysteria. "Lance, please call me back," Cassandra said, her words tumbling over each other. "Dexter didn't show up. Brooke's devastated. The whole wedding is falling apart. People are asking where you are. Please, we need you." I deleted the message and moved to the next one. Brooke's voice, tearful and desperate, recorded 2 hours later. "Dad, I messed up." Brooke sobbed into the phone. "He didn't come. He sent a text message saying he had a business emergency. Dad, I'm so sorry. I need you. Please come home." The third message was from my brother David, his voice grim with satisfaction and concern. "Lance, just heard from Marcus that your family's been trying to reach you," David said. "The con man didn't show, just like we predicted. But brother, there's more. Cassandra wrote him a check for $50,000 yesterday morning. Told the bank it was for wedding expenses, but the check was made out to Dexter's business account. He cashed it 3 hours before the ceremony and disappeared." I stared into the fire, watching flames dance around the logs I'd cut, and split myself. $50,000. The money I'd earned through years of dangerous work, felling trees in all kinds of weather, building a business one contract at a time. Gone, because my wife had chosen to trust a criminal over the man who'd provided for her family for nearly 2 decades. The remaining messages were variations on the same theme: panic, desperation, and growing awareness that they'd made a catastrophic mistake. But what struck me most wasn't their panic. It was their assumption that I'd come running back to fix what they'd broken. I pulled out my own phone and composed a single text message to Cassandra. "Received your messages. The man you chose over me turned out to be exactly what I said he was. The $50,000 you gave him was supposed to be Brooke's college fund that I never withdrew. Hope the lesson was worth the price." I sent the message, then turned off the phone. Tomorrow I'd be back to cutting timber, honest work that didn't involve manipulation or deception. The mountains would still be here long after this family drama had faded into memory. The fire popped and settled, sending sparks up toward stars that seemed close enough to touch. I'd found something in these woods that I'd lost somewhere along the way. The knowledge that a man's worth isn't determined by how desperately people need him when their poor choices catch up with them. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. A week into my Montana retreat, I received an unexpected visitor. I was sharpening my chainsaw near my campsite when I heard a vehicle approaching through the forest road. A rented SUV emerged from the tree line, and out stepped a woman I didn't recognize, mid-40s, professional attire that looked out of place in the wilderness, carrying a camera bag and recording equipment. "Mr. Bowman," she called out, approaching cautiously. "I'm Sarah Pierce from Channel 7 News. I've been investigating a story about wedding fraud, and your case has become central to a much larger pattern." I set down my chainsaw and studied her. "How did you find me?" "Your brother David gave me general directions," Sarah explained. "Mr. Bowman, Dexter Hartwell has victimized at least 12 families across 6 states. Your story is part of a documentary I'm producing about predators who target families through emotional manipulation." She pulled out a tablet and showed me footage she'd already gathered, interviews with other victims, financial records, even surveillance video of Dexter meeting with various women. The scope of his operation was staggering. "The interesting thing about your case," Sarah continued, "is that you're the first target who saw through his scheme before losing everything. Your brother's investigation and your preemptive legal moves have preserved evidence that could help prosecute him." "What kind of evidence?" I asked. "Bank records, forged documents, even recorded phone conversations," Sarah said. "Your wife wasn't just a victim, Mr. Bowman. She was actively helping Dexter access information about your business finances. We have recordings of her providing him with account numbers, asset valuations, even your lawyer's contact information." That hit harder than a falling tree. Cassandra hadn't just been manipulated. She'd been a willing participant in my financial destruction. "There's more," Sarah continued. "Dexter had backup plans. If the wedding con hadn't worked, he was prepared to claim Brooke as his biological daughter and demand half your assets in a retroactive child support lawsuit. Your wife was supposed to testify that you'd never legally adopted Brooke." I sat down on a fallen log, processing this information. The depth of the betrayal was breathtaking. Not just emotional manipulation, but a coordinated legal and financial assault on everything I'd built. "What do you need from me?" I asked finally. "An interview," Sarah said. "Your story shows how a smart, prepared man can protect himself from these predators. Other potential victims need to hear how you recognized the warning signs and took action." "And my family?" "That's up to you," Sarah replied. "We can keep their identities confidential if you prefer. But Mr. Bowman, your wife committed multiple felonies. The district attorney is preparing charges." I thought about Brooke, standing alone at the altar in a dress I'd paid for, finally understanding that the father who'd raised her was worth more than the stranger who'd abandoned her. I thought about Cassandra, sitting in our kitchen, explaining why blood was thicker than loyalty. "Set up your camera," I said. "Let's make sure other families don't go through what mine did." 3 weeks after the failed wedding, I returned to town for Dexter's arraignment and to face the aftermath of my family's choices. The timber work in Montana had given me clarity and perspective. I was no longer the same man who'd been blindsided in his garage that evening in June. Sarah Pierce's documentary had aired the previous week, featuring my interview about recognizing and protecting against family-based financial predators. The response had been overwhelming. Dozens of families contacted the television station with similar stories, and law enforcement agencies across the country were reopening cold cases with Dexter's pattern. The True Father Foundation Scholarship Fund had received its first major donation from an unexpected source: the recovered funds from Dexter's various schemes. His assets, frozen during the investigation, would be distributed to his victims and to organizations supporting children raised by step-parents. I was staying at a hotel downtown rather than returning to the house I'd built. That house held too many memories of a life that had been built on shifting ground. My lawyer Marcus had good news and sobering news when we met. The insurance covered most of the stolen money, Marcus reported, and Dexter's conviction means you'll recover additional funds from his seized assets. Financially, you'll come out ahead. "And Cassandra?" I asked. "She accepted a plea bargain," Marcus said quietly. "Conspiracy charges, restitution, and 2 years probation. She'll keep the house but nothing else. The timber business, land, equipment, all legally yours as specified in the revised will." That afternoon, I met Brooke at a coffee shop downtown. She looked older than her 24 years, worn down by weeks of guilt and public scrutiny. The failed wedding had become local legend, and everyone in town knew the story. "Dad, I don't even know where to start," Brooke said, her voice barely above a whisper. I threw away the best father a girl could ask for because I wanted something that was never real. "You made a choice," I replied, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "Choices have consequences. Can you ever forgive me?" she asked, tears flowing freely now. I studied her face, seeing traces of the 5-year-old who used to help me stack firewood, and the teenager who'd been so proud when I taught her drive my pickup truck. Brooke, forgiveness isn't the issue. Trust us. You spent months lying to me, planning to replace me, then help your mother steal money I'd earned to give to a criminal. I didn't know about the money, she protested. But you knew about the lies, I said. Every secret conversation, every hidden phone call, every plan made behind my back. You knew, and you chose deception over honesty. Brooke nodded, accepting the weight of her actions. What happens now? Now you learn to live with the consequences of valuing biology over loyalty, I said, standing to leave. And I learned to live without a family that never really valued what I provided. 6 months later, I was back in the Montana mountains, but this time as the owner of a new timber operation. I'd sold Bowman Timber and used the proceeds to purchase cutting rights on thousands of acres of national forest land. The work was harder, the conditions more remote, but the independence was exactly what I needed. The True Father Foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations. Sarah Pierce's documentary had sparked a national conversation about family loyalty and the value of step-parents. Donations poured in from across the country, and we'd already awarded scholarships to 50 young people raised by non-biological parents. David had become the foundation's full-time investigator, helping families recognize and avoid predators like Dexter. His work had led to arrests in 6 states and had saved dozens of families from financial ruin. I was splitting logs behind my new cabin when I heard a vehicle approaching. A familiar pickup truck emerged from the tree line, and out stepped my nephew Jake, David's eldest son. At 28, Jake had the kind of solid character that reminded me why family was about more than shared DNA. "Uncle Lance," Jake called out, crossing the clearing with the easy stride of a man comfortable in the wilderness. "Brought you something." He handed me a framed photograph, the first graduating class of True Father Foundation scholarship recipients, 23 young people who'd been raised by step-parents and were now pursuing careers in forestry, agriculture, and other traditional trades. "Thought you'd want to see the results of your investment," Jake said with a grin. "Our investment," I corrected. "This foundation belongs to everyone who believes that showing up every day matters more than sharing blood." That evening, Jake and I sat by the fire discussing the foundation's future plans and his own upcoming marriage to a woman who understood that family was about commitment, not genetics. As darkness fell over the mountains, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with my choices. My phone, which I'd finally started answering again for business purposes, buzzed with a text message. It was from Brooke, a weekly message she'd been sending since our coffee shop conversation 6 months earlier. The messages were always brief, always apologetic, and always went unanswered. "Dad, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I understand now what I lost. You were the real father all along. Love, Brooke." I read the message, then deleted it like I had all the others. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt with words. Some trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired with apologies. But as I watched sparks rise toward stars brilliant in the clear mountain air, I realized I'd found something better than the family I'd lost. I'd found peace, purpose, and the knowledge that a man's worth isn't determined by how desperately people need him when their poor choices catch up with them. The True Father Foundation would be my legacy, a testament to the idea that real fathers are made through daily choices, not biological accidents.